It's a pleasure to be here. I haven't been here in years. I have forgotten how beautiful it is, and I'm really enjoying my stay so far. Well, today is the 204th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. And at the age of 54, Lincoln was shot on Good Friday, April 14th, 1865, and died on April 15th, 1865 at 7:15 in the morning. I mention that because a staggering statistic that can't be overlooked and we need to ponder upon is that he was a major player on the world stage for only 4.5 years. And he was, at best, a Middle Eastern, important railroad attorney, but a Middle Eastern attorney who only wanted to be the state senator of Illinois, and somehow, because of a speech he gave at the Copper Union, became the Republican candidate for it. And yet, for that 4.5 years, as Tolstoy pointed out, the greatness of Napoleon, Caesar, and Washington are only moonlight to the son of Lincoln. As a great character, he will live as long as the world lives. Now that's Tolstoy, and that's pretty heavy stuff. On February 11th and 12th of 2009, Loyola University hosted a lecture, and we brought in Doris Kearns Goodwin, and she gave a lecture on Lincoln and leadership. By the way, Ms. Goodwin cost $45,000 for the day. I'm much cheaper than that. It was a stunning presentation by a stunning presenter, and I felt privileged to be her host and companion for this event, and she kissed me on stage, and we've got that on tape at Loyola, and you can see it on our webpage. And for the last 5 years, I have been reading and teaching Lincoln as one of the central figures in my classroom course called Value-Based Leadership. And reading Lincoln has been one of the most satisfying intellectual experiences of my life. If you're only going to read 2 books, I really recommend Doris Kearns Goodwin's A Team of Rivals and Wolfe's book, Lincoln's Melancholy. I think you will be greatly satisfied. A personal disclaimer before we begin: my students keep accusing me of being friends with Lincoln. I, of course, point out to them that that's not true, and I deny the charge. Okay, so I met him at a couple meetings in Chicago, but nevertheless. Now, as historian Robert Johanson has suggested, anyone who embarks on a study of Abraham Lincoln must first come to terms with and somehow get beyond Lincoln, the legend, the myth, and the martyr. More words have been written about Lincoln and more books have been written about Lincoln than any other American political figure. Over 16,000 books have been written about every aspect of Lincoln's personal and private life. And to further add to his iconic status, over 55,000 books have been written on the general topic of the Civil War. The only topic that's been written about more is World War II, and then you have to lump in all of the world reflecting on that. And then there's a whole book industry and memorabilia behind this amazing person. So that there have been 5,796 biographies on Lincoln and only 2,972 on Washington. 249 of those biographies were published in 2009 or at the bicentennial of his death. So we're in love with this man. This man is really important to us. And Harold Holzer alone has done 42 different books. Oops, did I go too fast? Let me try that again. I'm so sorry. Then there are the bestsellers, if I have this correct, because I am challenged. The bestsellers, of course, Team of Rivals, Doris Kearns Goodwin, Lincoln by Donald, which is a wonderful book, Tried by War, Abraham Lincoln as Commander-in-Chief, McPherson, and believe it or not, although I don't like his politics, I don't like the man, I don't like the show, Bill O'Reilly's book on Killing Lincoln is brilliant, truly brilliant, and I truly recommend it. Lots of factoids. Here's a little factoid. Robert Lincoln and John Wilkes Booth dated the same woman. Not at the same time, because that would be inappropriate. Okay, I'm just teasing. But it's really true. And Lincoln died at a hotel that Booth regularly came to when he was working in Washington. There's a small city and a small world, and how they were all interconnected. Lincoln's books, by the way, on everything. They wrote about everything. The taste in my mouth a little, what he ate and drank, the intimate world of Lincoln, supposedly an outing of Lincoln as a homosexual. Lincoln's Animal Friends, a child's book. And one of my favorite books that I didn't write or put down here, Lincoln Never Smoked a Cigarette. I mean, we become overly infatuated with the man. Moreover, according to, and oh, by the way, can I forget? Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, which is a horrible book and a worse film. So you can. All right. So I just want to make sure I get all these. Okay. And moreover, according to journalist and Lincoln aficionado Andrew Ferguson, there are probably more banks, bridges, schools, and statues named after Lincoln than any other president at any time. Without giving away my political biases, I am from Chicago, where the president lives, but never mind, is that the least named school or highway? Anyone? Any president? Nixon. Think about it. Only in Whittier, California. Okay, only Whittier, California. Yeah. And then there are all part of the memorabilia are also the serious collectors. 15,000 serious collectors of Lincoln, the artifacts, furniture, relics. In Rhode Island, there's a judge who has over 23,000 different items. It is amazing. And then my favorite is the Abes. These are an association of people who go around the country dressed as Lincoln. They say they're not actors, they're not in costume, they're representing his spirit. They're real creepy. Some of them are absolutely stunning, but woo! You want to be real careful around them. Don't let the children run. Oops, let me back up there a little bit. Did I miss one? I did miss one. Let me try. Can I back up? I got the Abes. Now what? No, there's one missing. Never mind. And in Illinois, for example, oh yes, there's Lincoln memorabilia. We spent $158 million in a Lincoln museum, which is sensational, which contains 47,000 letters and documents, 2,000 artifacts, his top hat, his glasses, the bloody gloves, and his commode at night. But we go too much into this, okay. And then the films, of course. If you haven't seen the Steven Spielberg film on Lincoln, it is everything that it could have been when the opening scene, as I put in a blog someplace, although I think it's really a Hollywood scene, when he speaks for the first time, it's really Lincoln. Now, having said all this, to get back to the myth, the mythology, nevertheless, at the human level, it's hard to deny Lincoln's iconic status. And all you have to do is look at the pictures. The one we all love, yeah? This is 1863. This is Lincoln, a man in full, looking directly at you. Lincoln was a technocrat. He believed that photographs were the wave of the future. So he had himself photographed early on because he felt people should know what the people look like. You'll notice in all the pictures, his hair is different because he never combed it, and the photographer would do something with it in order to do it. The famous iconic 1864, which is the $5 bill, which I think, again, he looks healthy here, doesn't he? Keep this in mind right now. This is not the Lincoln you saw in the film. The famous shot with his bodyguard didn't do such a good job, Mr. Pinkerton, and General McClellan. He was, the average man at that time was about 5'8". So at 6'4", this was a giant, and he wore the hat on purpose. It was not just fashionable; it further intimidated folks, as you could well see. And he wanted to intimidate those generals, believe me. One of the earliest shots, one of the more handsome shots, the shot that Doris Kearns Goodwin supposedly fell in love with. It looks like it's been touched, but it hasn't been touched in 1858. You've only seen him in a black suit. Here's his only white suit. Took one picture, didn't like the suit, never put it back on again, but there it is. In 1858 again. The 1864 shot with Tad, whom he really loved. And in 1857, coming out of a law convention in Chicago, he stepped down the block for a quick photo. Oops, quick photo, and there it is. Look at that. How can you not love that face, that nose? You think he's Italian with that nose, but let's not go into it right now. And then the first picture he ever took, his hair is totally slicked back. He borrowed the suit from the undertaker, but he was a starting lawyer in 1846. This is the one I want to get to, though. The one you saw in Spielberg, that he's emaciated, he's very tall, he's clapping his feet, he's got arms, he's got all sorts of problems, because he's living on an apple, bread, and water. And he never went to sleep during that war. This is his picture entering the White House. He grew the beard because it was fashionable and because people said he was ugly, so he was covering up something. This is an inmate at Auschwitz. This is 2 weeks before he died. He was dying then. John Wilkes just increased the rate a bit. And yet, with all this, look at these pictures, right? These amazing pictures of who he is and what he is. In the words of William Miller, Abraham Lincoln was not born on Mount Rushmore. He did not come into the world as a certified hero with his memorial already built on the mall and his face already stamped on a penny. But it is a curious truth that an unschooled 19th century American politician named Abraham Lincoln from the raw frontier villages of Illinois and Indiana has turned out to be among the most revered of human beings that has ever walked this earth. Except for religious figures, he has few superiors on the short list of the most admirers and even a shorter list of the most beloved of humankind. And I think it's true. I think it's true in Europe. You see pictures of Mandela all over South Africa, as well as Abraham Lincoln, and it touches me. Now, in the ethnic neighborhood I grew up in, full disclosure, I'm Italian and Jewish. I have guilt coming and going. I grew up, the neighborhood I grew up in, the good sisters who taught us, had three goals in mind: literacy, Catholicism, and assimilation. And because of this, we got lots of homework every night. We had to go to Mass every morning before class. And every year, we got off school for both Washington and Lincoln's birthdays. Now, back in the day, the nuns treated these birthdays like holy days of obligation. And to be honest, the nuns didn't spend much time on Washington. After all, everybody knew he was honest and he didn't tell a lie. And Washington was an aristocrat, a gentleman. So of course he was good. We expected him to be good. So there's no moral learning value in that, right? But Lincoln was a man of the soil, a man of Illinois. Illinois, nell'America, as the nuns would say, because they spoke Italian with me. And so the good sisters stressed him, and that he was neither a scholar or a gentleman, and that Lincoln had to work at being good. Well, Lincoln had to want to be good. Lincoln had to choose to be good. For them, Lincoln was the product of a strong work ethic and the fulfillment of the American dream. For those good nuns, Lincoln was a secular saint, and so revered him for that. Now, having said all this, full disclosure requires me to briefly point out that while he was alive, Lincoln was no secular saint. Lincoln was the most reviled man in America. And John Wilkes Booth was not the first one to take a shot at him. Lincoln happily missed the other shots along the way. And he was one of the most intensively hated public figures in a country that was ripping itself apart and brother killing brother. He was the object of vicious editorial attacks which would now have every lawyer in this room going, let me defend him on that one, right? He was the butt of humiliating and dehumanizing political cartoons, cartoons that are slanderous by today's standards. He was the object of public anger and rage and regularly hung and burned in effigy. And he was hated by black liberals and white conservatives and black conservatives alike. He was not liberal enough. He was too liberal. He was this, he was that. John Wilkes Booth's famous phrase, he thought, captured Lincoln, sic semper tyrannis, thus always to tyrants. And many believed that he was a tyrant. And he was. But if anybody remembers the Roman history, tyrants were elected by the people to take care of things in extremis, and he did. Only winning two presidential elections aside, his canonization only came after the war and success of the war and his assassination. And a question you have to look at in leadership studies, if Lincoln had not won the war and McClellan had won the war, what would we think of him right now? And slavery would have probably succeeded well into the 20th century, and the Confederacy may have, in fact, broken off. Now, certainly, beyond the legend, beyond the myth, there was only a man, and the truth of the matter is that Lincoln's life does, though, read like a real melodramatic Hollywood script. He was born on a farm in a log cabin, but he hated farming. He really did split rails, but only when he had to, and not as many and not as proficiently as legend claims. He really was notably unhandsome. Ugly, I think, is a term nowadays. He really was tall, thin, leggy, awkward, and a careless dresser who, until his wife started buying Brooks Brothers suits when he was president of the United States, his trousers never quite hit his ankles. Yes, and in fact, he was unschooled. He did lose money in a number of business ventures and only really began to earn money as a lawyer after he married his wife and settled down in Springfield. He was, in fact, absent-minded. He may have been Honest Abe, but on more than one occasion he forgot to pay his bills and keep his appointments. He was, in fact, melancholic, moody, and morose, and a few times his fits of despair lasted for months and required intervention by friends. And sometimes, even before the loss of his children and the crushing cruelties of war, both were killing him. Both were killing him. He said that the sadness of life regularly overwhelmed him and rendered him incapable of deliberation and debate. Moreover, as Josiah Will Schenck pointed out, Lincoln's storyline is made even more dramatic when you consider Lincoln's chances of success at the time of inauguration of the Civil War. And I quote, "Never had the conditions for a president-elect been so severe, and never had anyone seemed by his credentials so poorly prepared. Lincoln's 15 predecessors included war hero generals, vice presidents, secretaries of states, and veterans of Congress, and the founding fathers. Before coming to Washington, he had been east of the Alleghenies just a handful of times and still bore the stamp of a man raised in the frontier." Remember, Illinois and Michigan was the frontier. Surveying the start of Lincoln's term, Harriet Beecher Stowe, of the famous Uncle Tom's Cabin, compared the nation to a ship on a perilous passage, and at its helm was a plain working man totally unfit for the job. And that was a backer of his. How about that? And when you think of the preparations for the presidency, think about that. The only other comparison here is Barack Obama, who 4 years after he was inaugurated as senator of the United States, he was president of the world. Too fast of a jump by anyone's standard. Illinois Senate legislator 4 terms, 1 term in Congress on a political deal. He went to Washington because that was the deal, and he came back. Twice a candidate for the U.S. Senate, which really made him the candidate for the presidency. No administrative experience whatsoever. Now, you can't look at that, and because if you look at the history of the American presidencies, 99% of the presidents had no administrative experience except the officers, the generals, et cetera, et cetera. And to make matters even worse, I love to read this little thing. By the time Lincoln took office, 7 states had seceded from the Union to form the Confederate States of America. Barely 10 days before he took the oath of office, Jefferson Davis was sworn in as president of the Confederacy. And President Buchanan had given up all hope of holding the country together until Lincoln. Remember, there was a long, he didn't take office until March, right? He wasn't sure he could actually hold the United States together until Lincoln got there. Moreover, Lincoln left Washington and said to Lincoln, "I am the last president of the United States. Have a good term," you know, and off you went. So, I mean, these are periculous times, to use old-fashioned terminology. These were difficult times. Now, I'm sure there can be nothing worse than a life that, than these kind of backgrounds. And yet, with all of this, and it's such a poor beginning, and such, enemies and rivals along the way, I find it amazing that according to Mario Cuomo, that over the years, Lincoln has been trotted out to support everything from communism to feminism to prohibitionism to vegetarianism to libertarianism, et cetera, et cetera. He's claimed by all. He's become all of our saints, not just my good nuns who taught me. And he is seen both as a liberal, as a conservative. But as Cuomo points out, there's really no political label elastic enough to capture the length and breadth of this man in regard to his character. Now, beyond all of his cultural status and his legend as an icon, a myth, and a martyr, according to Doris Kearns Goodwin, what we've always forgotten, because we've all loved him, that Lincoln was a shrewd, thoughtful, and well-prepared politician. If you've seen the Lincoln film, you now know the great secret that the 13th Amendment was passed through bribery. But better that good and the loss of a lesser good, okay? Lincoln was a person of character. He was a thinker. He held certain principles that were sacred. He was a practical person as well. He was a person who believed that ethics and politics were verbs, action words, and not just naming nouns. Lincoln needed and wanted to be hands-on in a time of national crisis, even if that meant breaking or compromising a rule here or there to save a larger principle. This presentation, I think, will be, briefly, we'll be out of here by 4:30 or 5, the absolute latest, to unpack some of the beliefs, values, and action plans that influence this extraordinary transformational figure. And I want to offer a very topographical discussion of what I call the 10 critical tasks of leadership. Now, I need to note that he did not name these as his 10 critical tasks. He did not always consciously even create them. Many were created because of the needs of the moment and the situation, and we could look back in history and see this is, at this point he did this or he did that, and you have it on your tables. He was learning to be a leader on the job, and frankly, he was flying blindly. And I just found a wonderful metaphor that is apt for his trying to change the nation and save the nation. It was like trying to fix a flat tire while the car was still in motion. And so it was very clear. You know, when they declared war, there were no troops in Washington. Seems a bit of a problem, don't you think? And Washington could have been taken over in a thrice, and they had to wait for 6 weeks before some troops marched down from New York. An incredibly complex thing, and which he had to assume powers. The presidency had never had to act as commander-in-chief. He had never had special powers that he had to assume. He assumed them because they weren't denied in the Constitution, and he had assumed them to take care of the nation. So I want to try to develop these, and I want to talk about these individually. And I want to start with the 10 critical tasks, develop a moral compass. Now, what we're talking about here is Lincoln knew what he believed in. Lincoln was a thinker. He wasn't well read. He didn't read hundreds and thousands of books. Probably read only about 55 books, but he read them deeply. He could recite Shakespeare by heart. And the reason his speeches are so flowery is because the Bible was the most common thing read at that time, and he read that to read the stories as well. That's another discussion for where he was religiously. But he understood the notion of principles and actions. And he had three absolute political convictions. One, that the Declaration of Independence is our founding document. Not our secondary document, it's our founding document. And that's the whole purpose of the Gettysburg Address, that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Lincoln says there's no parentheses after that. And it would have been Catholics first, except for Catholics and blacks and Jews. And no parentheses. It says all men. If that's our belief, even if we failed in the breach, that's our commitment. Secondly, that the original political ideal in the Constitution was to form a more perfect union, that the Constitution itself were the bylaws, we should understand that here in a school of law, were the rules by which you implemented the philosophical principle of equality. And that, and he believed with Clay, that liberty and union, one and indispensable now and forever, a more perfect union, that the Constitution was not, were the laws, but not the principle of the states. And last, that secession was a reductio ad absurdum, a reduction to absurdity. So Michigan is mad, and you're in this district, and you recede from your township, and then you recede from the state, and the state, it goes on. Where does it stop? You can't do that. In a democracy, we have to work it out, not run away. Otherwise, you got a yeah-yeah fight. Remember, guys, in the playground? Yeah, well, I'm going home, and you took the ball and left. It doesn't make any sense. As he said in his message to Congress in 1862, I consider the central idea of the struggle is the necessity that is upon us of proving that popular government is not an absurdity. Only England and America were democracy in the world right now, and one South American country. If we fail, if we go, it will go far to prove the incapacity of people to govern themselves. Lincoln believed that the Union and our general democratic ideals had to be saved and preserved. He believed that America is the last best hope of Earth, on Earth, And that was his message to Congress in 1862. And so those were his convictions. He said, I need to save the Union. That famous letter that he sent to the paper baron, and name escaping me right now, quick, the paper baron, you know who I mean, Greeley. And he said, first I will save the Union. Then, nothing else is important. Till I save the Union, then we can vote on every other issue. We need to save the Union. Secondly, think logically. What a concept. I hope my undergraduates grasp it sometime before I die. By the way, 46 years at Loyola, not 40. I know every second I've been there. Anyway, think logically. Be clear about your methodology. Lincoln was a child of the Enlightenment. Lincoln was not afraid of work, but he wanted to work with his mind and not his body. He believed in the powers of words. He believed in the powers of logic. Reason, he said, is our only acceptable form of public discourse. We have to be rational. He believed that politics, like philosophy, is first and last an exercise in reason. And the ideas that come out on top are the ones that have the best reasons on their side. For Lincoln, and I hope this is taught in this law school, he was a man who believed in the logic of law, that law is based on reason. Law is based on a conviction, on a compromise or a contract between individuals to behave in a certain way. Law is neither magic, mystical, or sacred. It can be changed. In fact, Lincoln would have accepted secession if we could vote on it, but we couldn't vote on So he believed in the power of law. He believed that law is the way that divides us, civilization and barbarism. And he believed law is the only way groups could live together. Don't forget the very word for civilization is civitas, which is cities. And Aristotle was right. Civilization only begins in cities. Number 3, get your politics right. Margaret Thatcher, a name I rarely evoke, especially associate with Lincoln, said principled decision-making has to be properly prepared for. I think that's absolutely correct, no matter what it is. Get your politics right. Lincoln understood that you can't simply impose major policy, that you must teach, that you have to give people time to adjust, to understand what's going on, and that the role of a leader is to teach, to preach, and to be a cheerleader very often. Now, George Bush, too, in the second term, the first year of the second term, remember, he says, I'm going to use some of my social capital, and I want to change Social Security. And to his great credit, although I'm glad it failed because I'm going to start collecting in 3 months. You have to at 70, you know. He said he went around and gave 90 speeches. I want to change Social Security. That's exactly the power of the office. He just couldn't mandate it. He wanted to teach. It failed. Okay? Mr. Obama spent a year of his presidency trying to get the medical changes in. That's still, you know, yet to be totally adjudicated. But he had to teach, he had to preach, he had to change. And what Lincoln understood is you just can't act, even in a righteous cause. So Fort Sumner, when South Carolina, when it was attacked by the Confederacy, finally in April 12, 1861, then Lincoln could act. He would not reinforce or attack. He waited for the Confederates to fire the first shot, so we had the high moral ground. He says, you just can't act. It can't be too precipitous. You have to get people ready for this. The Emancipation Proclamation, which is critical. Lincoln said, and Lincoln always said, slavery is wrong. It's always been wrong. I've always believed in that, although Lincoln was a slow learner. He went all the way from abolition to, he came all the way around, including sending all blacks back to Liberia, or the new state of Liberia, freedom place, okay? But he was not an abolitionist. He wanted to send them either to Liberia or to Haiti or South America, but there are 4 million slaves in it. Lincoln's principle is some of this. The Constitution does not allow me to free the slaves. The Constitution says that slaves are property. No president can take property away from another human being. We could buy them. He also had a plan to buy every slave for $400, okay? He said, but I can't do that. So the Emancipation Proclamation was, since they're property and since we've captured their lands, we've now taken their property and they're free. That whetted the North's ability to accept slaves as free, because at the end the war was about the freedom of slaves and the right of secession. But don't think every Northerner was, yay, let's free the slaves. That was not the case. He had to teach, he had to preach, he had to cheerlead to the effect. Number 4. Nope, did I go 5? That's 4. I'm sorry. What did I do? It's supposed to be 4. Sorry. Be careful about how you communicate. Well, you only have to read the papers to know how important that is. The top spy in America, General Petraeus, certainly wasn't thinking very much about what he said and how he said it. Imagine putting it on an email and thinking, well, no one will find this. Brilliant spy maneuvers. What the Petraeus situation has led everyone to realize, all love notes must be written on edible paper and ingested immediately. But Lincoln believed in communication. The notion that he wrote the Gettysburg Address on the back of an envelope and the train coming down is an absolute fallacy. He worked on it for a couple of weeks, and yes, he went over on the train. It wasn't right there. But the wonderful thing in the film, by the way, when you see that, Lincoln didn't believe in long speeches, except for his first inaugural address. They're all short. And the 272 words, the most important 272 words, arguably in the American jurisprudence system. Also his second inaugural, very, very short. It's all on one wall when you go in, right? Do you see it? When Lincoln is here, it's right over there on the right, okay, if I remember correctly. And point of fact, so in the film, when he's there to commemorate the new naval building, takes off his hat, which he did, because everyone did. I'm here to dedicate this building and to suggest that it be honor the men and the women who serve here, whatever, I don't think it was women at the time. So let's raise the flag. Thank you, that's all I have to say. He wrote everything down. The address that he gave from the back of the train leaving Springfield, he ran back into the train and wrote it down because he said the president's words carry clout and are important. So you must communicate carefully. What a concept if all of our politicians communicate carefully. Wouldn't that be wonderful? What an oxymoron. I teach business ethics, so I understand oxymorons, please, ladies and gentlemen. But what he was talking about is guard your words. Do not speak extemporaneously. Remember, it was also a typographical society. Everything was published. The Lincoln-Douglas debates were all published in the paper. Everybody knew Lincoln because you read it. People did that. And as John Nicholas has pointed out, a remarkable thing is his concern with words is he's the only president, perhaps one of the few politicians in the history of American politics, who learned to write because he fell in love with words. And he learned to write because he understood the instrumental factor of words. But he learned to write so well, he could have made a living as a writer, to hire him. He understood the impact of words. He understood what it meant. And so this concern of his. Now, be practical, but also be empathic. Lincoln had practical intelligence, and Lincoln really believed that the purpose of being a politician is to implement as best as possible the ideals of a people and the ideals of a nation. But politicians try to get real things done. I was in the philosophy department for 25 years. There was one point in which we're trying to pass a resolution in regard to this one policy, and one of the senior professors says, well, I believe in R. And the other senior professor says, well, I believe in H or B. Anyone? No, so everybody was R or B. Guess what? Everybody walked away. There's no such thing as compromise, because to give up at all meant to give in. In the School of Business, well, I believe in R, I believe in B. All right, but we've got to move this. Let's talk. Let's get to H and we'll get out of here, okay? This notion of compromise. He said, you cannot do what Luther said you should do in regard to theology. Here I stand, I could do no other. That politics is about implementing philosophical principles. Yes, we must be prudent. Yes, we must be careful. Yes, we must take into account the situations before us. But don't throw away the good in pursuit of the perfect. So you have to do something. He didn't want to fix habeas corpus. He didn't want to take off Delaware. But if you look at a map, Delaware had gone the other way. Guess what? It would have been Washington there, surrounded by Confederate states. How's that working out for you? So he had to do things. He needed to do things. But he believed that the purpose of politicians was to always to do what is possible and dems the conditions that exist, he said, and he's spelling it D-E-M-S D-A, and dat, D-A-T. He says, and you have to work with that. This is not a perfect world, and you will not get a perfect solution. Select a good team. This, of course, is taken from Doris Kearns Goodwin's work. But I think as a student of business and ethics and as a student of leadership, the key job of all CEOs is to avoid terminal staph infection. Terminal staph infection, CEOs. Okay, I'm working with this. Is this mic on, Father? And I think what Lincoln was trying to do, Lincoln decided he needed a cabinet that was made up of the best possible minds and the best people there. He had never experienced some of these things. He had read these things. So Lincoln hired on his cabinet the 3 Republicans who ran against him. William Stewart, the senator of New York, who should have been the Republican nominee and who was the leading thinker of the Republican Party. Solomon Chase of Ohio, he made treasurer. Unfortunately, Mr. Chase, as Mr. Lincoln said, suffered from the bug of the presidency. He wanted to be one. Edward Bates of Missouri as the Attorney General. Strong men, men of conviction, but well-connected men. He also hired corrupt individuals, Republicans, because he knew how these would get the wheels going, this would get stuff going, and then he fired them somewhere along the line. He hired Democrats. Most importantly, to show his attempt to do the job the right way, he hired Edward Stanton, who once fired him summarily on the street by saying, I will not deal with this long-armed ape, and walked away from him to his face. And yet Lincoln hired him 6 years later because he was the best possible man for the job. Every member of his cabinet was better known, better educated, and had more experience than Lincoln. He was not intimidated by this. He wanted the best and the brightest, and he believed that reason would win out. And he said, to his great ability, this humility, once a person stopped opposing him, he would put everything else behind him. That if this is politics, that you could be on other sides, but once we could work together. This was not a conscious attempt to avoid a series of mini-me's, just to avoid a series of, he wanted the best minds there. He wanted to avoid the arrogance and the unwillingness to listen to the needs of others. We're almost done. Number 7, learn from your enemy. This is really important. Lincoln never called the Confederacy a state. He called them the secessionists. Lincoln never said that the Congress that was running there and the president was really the president. He called them breaking the law. And he said, these are our neighbors. Remember what he said at the first inaugural address. We are not enemies, but friends. Though passion may be strained, it must not break the bonds of affection that exist between us. He said you have to know your enemy. These former friends and future friends are our enemies now, but we cannot hate them as villains. We have to tie back into them. We cannot allow hatred to ruin us and ruin them. He hated slavery, and he said, and I think slavery is wrong, but were I a Southerner at these times, I too would probably have to defend that situation. In regard to the Civil War, he said, our real enemy is the enemy of ideas and the enemy of traditions we need to break, not each other, though we kill each other in its wake. He said, we need to appeal to the better angels of our nature. I've always thought it very interesting, and this is not a pro-Obama speech, but if you've seen the film out right now, is Dark 30, help me, Dark 30, what is it? Zero Dark 30. What they didn't show in that film, and I wish they had, because it became a very popular dramatic rendition about, the good guys killing the bad guys, so on and so forth. Do you remember, they didn't just go back to the base. They landed on a helicopter when there was a Muslim minister there, and Mr. Osama bin Laden was washed, dressed in burial clothes, and given full rights of Muslim burial and buried at sea within 24 hours. Out of respect for the religion, if not respect for the man. Even though that man was our enemy, we are not fighting Muslims. Lincoln understood those distinctions, that we have different convictions, but our concerns are the same. Develop the capacity to relax. Humor, that's how he did it. If you saw the film, Really Stanton would bristle, not one more damn story, and he would run away, because Lincoln told stories. Lincoln traveled the circuit. Lincoln, by the way, did 5,055 various cases in his time in Illinois, but most of them he did through arbitration, not going to trial. And so he told stories. He got people, he believed in the metaphor of stories. He says, and he says more than that, he says, without jokes I would die, for they are the vents for my mood and gloom. Now, the two fallacies in the film, 3, actually, he would have never hit Robert, if you haven't seen the film. He would never hit a son in public. Secondly, that opening scene is too Hollywood, so you have a black soldier reciting the man, oh, come on, it's not, that didn't happen, et cetera, et cetera. And the third thing is, I just lost the third thing because I forgot to take all my pills this morning, but I remember. What was the second thing again? No. Third thing, he loved to tell the stories. He would sit down and tell the stories. Oh, the telegraph room where everyone was there. No, it didn't look like that at all. It was a shack behind the White House, a shack. And he would go there all night, and that's where he would stay all night long. And in his coat, the long coat, he had joke books, comic books. And they were gestures, and he would read these at night. And he would read these to the boys. He knew the telegraph operators better than he knew the generals. And he would read these to the boys. He said, without jokes, I would die, for they are the vents for my moods and my gloom. Humor was used by Lincoln as a cure for, not as a cure for life, but as a means to make it tolerable. Humor was a tonic, not just a permanent cure. If I write one more book, it's going to be on the importance of being funny, and that we use humor as both a sword and a shield and a way to deal with life. Mark Twain said, the human race has only one really effective weapon against life, and that is laughter. While Lincoln was in the White House, believe it or not, he went to theater. That night at Ford Theater was nothing special about it, and they used to hold the theater forum. Remember, they got there late, and they used to hold theater forum. He went 100 times. and that brief period. And he read these joke books all the times, and he thought that they were key to knowledge. And that he said, you have to have a thick skin, and jokes allow us that. He says, remember, I do nothing in malice. And so you need to laugh at this. And here's his favorite joke, and it's a joke about himself. Two Quaker women are talking about who would win the war, President Lincoln for the United States or Jefferson Davis for the Southern rebel states. The first Quaker woman says, I think that Jefferson Davis will win. And the second woman says, why dost thou think so? And the first woman says, because he is a praying man. And the second woman says, but Abraham Lincoln is a praying man too. And the first Quaker woman says, yes, but the Lord will think Abraham is joking. That was huge in 1865, but nevertheless. I mean, you'd be on the floor laughing. Find your grant. Besides the staff, besides your inner circle, good executives, good leaders have to find the right people for the right jobs up and down the line. Your middle class, your middle executives, your lower executives, your staff, your people. The new chief of staff for President Obama is a St. John's graduate, nice Catholic boy, 3 kids, so on and so forth. And he's there 24/7. That he has 3 kids. The wife says, yeah, he's been home 4 times, so we've been lucky. But because this is total commitment, absolutely total commitment. He has no life of his own, so on and so forth. You need that in these kind of power jobs. That wonderful article last year in Atlantic Magazine by the woman who left working for Hillary as Hillary's assistant says, certain jobs simply can't be done. They demand too much of us, but we need to find the people who could do them because they have to be done. So he said, you got to find your grant. Get the right people at the top. Get the right people to do the right job. Don't try to do everything yourself. Choose subordinates that are prepared to do the job. And choose subordinates who will follow you, who believe in you. He says, surround yourself with people who know their business and share their success. Give them their lead. Remember what they said of Grant. No one would fight. McClellan wouldn't fight. He created an army, didn't want to lose that army. And people kept saying, well, Grant wins, but he drinks. And Lincoln finally said, find out what he's drinking and pass it around to the rest of the generals, because this is the only man that will fight. You need, and Lincoln understood it so well. You didn't want to capture property. You wanted to kill Lee. You needed to kill Lee's army. That's what it was about. He understood for the first time huge armies facing each other. If you've seen Gettysburg, by the way, the film is longer than the battle. And if you've been, I was at Gettysburg College last year delivering an address, and I got to go to the battlefield with them. And this horrible thing that happened there, he was mad at Meade because Meade could have then said, forward, go, get him. But he let Lee skip away because he said, I won this battle. I don't want to lose the war, though. He was afraid. He was afraid, okay? But we needed to do that. And he said, you need to find people. I can't be there every time. I have to do it. Finally, accept change. Learn from your errors. Accept responsibility. Be humble. Change is inevitable. You have to be open to it. You have to either try to manage it or be managed by it. And you have to be willing to change with change. And you have to learn not to rationalize your errors and not to always defend yourself. Fred Stewart, Mr. Stewart's son, said, presidents and kings are not apt to see their flaws in their own arguments. But fortunately for the Union, it had a president at a critical juncture in its history who combined a logical intellect with an unselfish heart. He knew when he was wrong, and he accepted responsibility for his errors. And he learned from his errors. By the way, at Gettysburg, that was the first major win, except for Antietam before. So he wrote Meade this hostile letter, 3 pages. Damn it, you should have gone. And when it was all finished, put it in an envelope, and wrote on the envelope, to General Meade, never to be delivered. Because he realized, this is the only guy I ever had to win. I'm not going to now smack him for it, So he understood. He said, because I'm ultimately in charge. When the Union was losing, until we took Atlanta, until Sheridan came down and took Atlanta, Lincoln was losing. He would have lost it to McClellan. McClellan would have settled the war. Slavery would have continued. All those deaths for nothing. But Lincoln was planning a transition to McClellan because that's what the law said. And that's what the Union was about. And he was willing to accept. But Lincoln didn't take this from Eisenhower, but this is the spirit of what I mean by learning, okay? This is the spirit of what I mean. I wish all of our leaders had this in them. Dwight David Eisenhower June 6, 1944, sent my father to his death. He didn't die. I'm grateful. He hit a beach called Omaha and these gliders that fell apart, okay? But Eisenhower had sent the largest invasion in the world, and he had in his little Eisenhower jacket a note. And the note read, "Our landings in Cherbourg, Le Havre, have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based on the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all in their bravery and devotion the duty could do. If any blame attached to this, it is mine. I hereby submit my resignation. Dwight David Eisenhower." When's the last time you heard a politician say he's wrong? Knowing when to go, knowing when to quit. We have a message yesterday that Father and I were talking about. I take it as a symbol of strength. I'm 85, I have congested heart failure, I could barely stand up, I cannot run this place anymore. Somebody take over. Lincoln in the 1864 election campaign against George McClellan was won at the end, but Lincoln was prepared to go because he believed in the law. Now, what can I say in conclusion so you could run out of here and say, my God, an hour and 20 minutes. Lincoln is not just a myth, but a man whose stature has been transmogrified by our hero worship of him. To be fair, this cult-like status actually makes some sense, doesn't it? I think both consciously and subconsciously, we have a cultural need and desire for heroes. That's why, ESPN is what it is, because we want to love somebody. We want somebody out there doing something glorious, even if it's catching a football or hitting a baseball. I am convinced we all seek renewal and betterment, development, and perfection. Heroes, models help us. We want to be better. We want to improve. We all seek models and examples, best case scenarios, best business practices to do so. We desperately aspire to be more than we are. So we seek, desire, and crave models to guide us, persons and personalities to emulate. Lincoln may not have been a hero or a saint, but he was a man of character and principle and ethics. And as Aristotle pointed out, and yes, I was a classmate of Aristotle, ethics cannot be learned by simply reading a treatise on virtue. It can best be grasped by witnessing or studying the conduct of an ethical individual. In this case, our very own Abraham Lincoln, and in South Africa's case, Nelson Mandela. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.